Imagine a world where water, the essence of life itself, becomes a forbidden luxury, where rivers are no longer free to flow, and fountains run dry under royal decree. Now picture the woman who ordered it all, slowly being consumed by the very thing she tried to control. Madrid, summer of 1599. The sun burns over the royal Alcazar, its heat pressing down on marble and gold. Inside, behind heavy velvet curtains, a princess waits, Isabel Clara Eugenia, daughter of the mighty Philip II of Spain. At 33, she's the perfect image of power and grace, yet trapped in a cage of politics. Every proposed marriage has failed. Every plan for her future has turned to dust. But destiny is about to hand her a kingdom and a curse. When her brother, the new king, announces her betrothal to Archduke Albert of Austria, the stage is set for one of history's strangest and darkest reigns. Together they will rule the Spanish Netherlands, a land of rivers, canals, and ceaseless rain. A land where control of water means control of everything. And soon, the woman raised in a court that feared bathing as sinful will make a decision that will change her fate forever. She will ban water itself. And in doing so, she will seal her own doom, her body consumed by filth, her flesh alive with worms, until the very element she outlawed becomes her only salvation. This is not just a story about an empress. It's a warning about power, pride, and the one force no ruler can ever command, nature itself. The summer of 1599 scorched Madrid like a punishment from heaven. Every street shimmered beneath the July sun. The dust rose from the cobblestones in lazy spirals that caught the light before falling back in silence. Inside the royal Alcazar, behind walls so thick the outside world seemed like a mirage, Infanta Isabel Clara Eugenia sat by a window that refused to catch a breeze. The room was heavy with still air, the scent of beeswax candles, dried lavender, and the faint metallic trace of gold embroidery on her gown. Servants moved like shadows. Somewhere, a clock struck the half-hour. She didn't look away from the horizon. Below her, the people of Madrid were scattering for shade, covering their heads with cloths, hiding from the heat. She fanned herself slowly, almost mechanically. For all her royal grace, there was something exhausted in the movement, a kind of weariness that no silk gown or jewel could disguise. Isabel was 33, old by royal standards for an unmarried princess. The daughter of the most powerful monarch in Europe, Philip II of Spain, and yet, despite her lineage, she was trapped. Her father had spent half her life negotiating and breaking engagements like a man playing chess with the map of Europe. France, Austria, the Holy Roman Empire. Each alliance had been dangled before her and then snatched away in the swirl of politics, religion, and war. She had once been promised to Henry III of France, but that arrangement fell apart in a haze of assassination and intrigue. Then came Emperor Rudolph II, whose mind teetered somewhere between genius and madness. Each proposal collapsed under the weight of ambition and mistrust. Now, Philip II was gone, entombed among the Escorial kings. His son, Isabel's younger brother, Philip III, sat on the throne, a boy king more fond of theater and pleasure than governance. Power had shifted. The Spanish court was already changing around her, filling with new favorites and flatterers. She felt it keenly. Her father's world, the one she had been raised to serve, was vanishing. A soft knock broke her thoughts. "Your Highness, His Majesty requests your presence in the council chamber." The lady-in-waiting bowed and withdrew. Isabel rose, every gesture controlled, rehearsed through decades of etiquette. The fan stopped. The silence that followed felt almost ceremonial. As she walked through the palace halls, her footsteps echoed off marble and stone. Portraits of ancestors lined the walls, grim Habsburg faces with the same heavy jaw and solemn stare. She knew what they demanded of her: composure, dignity, obedience. But beneath the calm mask, her mind raced. Her brother rarely summoned her to council. He preferred card games, masquerades, and the whispering of his advisor, Francisco Gómez de Sandoval y Rojas, the Duke of Lerma, the true hand on the wheel of the empire. What could this meeting mean? Another diplomatic mission? Some polite exile to a convent? The council chamber smelled of parchment and incense. Philip III sat at the head of the table, pale, almost boyish, flanked by the Duke of Lerma. Both men looked oddly satisfied. "Sister," the king began, rising with a faint smile, "at last, we bring you news worthy of your patience. Our cousin, Archduke Albert of Austria, has accepted our proposal. You shall be married within the year." For a heartbeat, the room froze. Isabel inclined her head, her face unreadable. Inside, the words echoed like the toll of a bell. Albert of Austria, a cousin 14 years her senior, pious and respectable. But it was not the groom that caught her attention. "As part of your marriage contract," her brother continued, "you and your husband will rule the Spanish Netherlands as sovereigns, in your own right." The Duke of Lerma's smile widened. "It will be a blessing to the crown. Those provinces have bled us for decades. Let them now pay fealty to family, to you." Isabel's fingers tightened around the edge of her gown. She understood instantly. This was not a gift. It was an escape for Spain, a way to offload a costly war and keep the territory under the illusion of independence. Still, she bowed. "It is an honor to serve, Your Majesty. Spain's cause is my own." Her voice was calm. Only her eyes betrayed the flicker of emotion, duty swallowing disappointment. 3 months later, on a cold November morning, the bells of Valencia Cathedral rang for her wedding. Pope Clement VIII himself blessed the union, a union as political as it was sacred. The ceremony glittered with gold and incense. Ambassadors whispered in Latin and French. Courtiers craned for a glimpse of the new royal pair. Isabel's gown shimmered like sunlight on water. Albert stood solemn beside her, already gray at the temples, his eyes kind but distant. When the vows were spoken and the final chant faded into the vaulted ceiling, the court erupted in applause. Spain had gained a marriage and lost a problem. Within months, the newlyweds were bound for Brussels, the heart of their new dominion. The journey was perilous. They crossed the Pyrenees under armed guard, rode through Burgundy and Lorraine, through lands that barely tolerated Spanish banners. Rain fell for days. Mud swallowed the wheels of their carriages. At every village, Isabel saw faces foreign to her, blonde, pale, curious. Her Spanish ladies complained endlessly. "They drink beer instead of wine, Highness. They even bathe in winter." Isabel smiled faintly. "Every land has its customs. If we are to govern them, we must first understand them." Those words would later haunt her. When the couple finally reached Brussels in the spring of 1600, the city exploded with celebration. Trumpets, banners, a sea of people. Wooden arches decorated the streets. Children threw petals beneath the hooves of white horses. For days, the festivities continued. Banquets, fireworks, parades. But behind the joy, Isabel felt something uneasy, a current of tension, like a river about to overflow. The Netherlands were split in two. The Protestant North, defiant and backed by England and France, and the Catholic South, still loyal to Spain but weary of endless bloodshed. Everywhere she turned, she saw scars of war, burned villages, deserted farms, soldiers begging in the streets. In her first council meeting at the Koudenberg Palace, the reality was laid bare. The treasury was empty, the army unpaid. Rebellion simmered just beneath the surface. Albert, earnest and thoughtful, spoke first. "We must seek peace. Spain cannot bleed forever for these lands." Isabel listened. She had learned from her father that power built on weakness invited contempt. "Peace," she said quietly, "is desirable, but it must be honorable. To earn respect, we must first restore order." She paused, then added something that would change everything. "We will begin with water." The room murmured. "Water." Count Mansfeld, a veteran of Flanders wars, frowned. "Highness, the Flemish hold water sacred. They live by it. Rivers feed their fields, their mills, their trade. Touch that, and you touch their soul." Isabel met his gaze calmly. "I do not intend to deprive them. I intend to regulate them. Water is life, and life must be governed. Whoever controls it, controls the land." Her logic was impeccable and lethal. Within months, royal decrees rippled through the provinces. Every mill, canal, and ferry required a license. Taxes were levied on river commerce. Toll posts sprouted like weeds along the waterways. The revenue flowed. The crown's coffers filled again. Even Albert admitted the policy worked. But resentment was building like a storm behind a dam. To understand Isabel's decision, one must understand her world. The Spanish court of her youth was steeped in fear. Fear of sin, fear of impurity, fear of change. Bathing was rare. Physicians warned that water opened the pores to disease. Her father had called frequent washing a Moorish habit, tainted by the legacy of Islam. Cleanliness meant moral cleanliness, not physical. So when Isabel looked upon the damp, muddy canals of the Low Countries, she didn't see vitality. She saw chaos, temptation, danger. Water was unpredictable, uncontrollable, and Isabel, above all, needed control. At first, the results seemed glorious. Brussels thrived under her strict governance. Roads were repaired, new fortifications built. Merchants grumbled but paid. Even her critics in Madrid began to call her the Iron Daughter of Philip. When peace with England was signed in 1604, it felt like vindication. Her authority, her discipline, had delivered stability. Albert looked at her with pride and a trace of fear. But then came 1605, a summer without rain. The canals dropped to mud. Crops withered. Breweries shut down when the water taxes made their trade impossible. In Ghent, mobs of brewers stormed the tax office, shouting, "Water for the people." Soldiers fired. Dozens fell. The echo of rebellion spread like fire. Advisors urged moderation. "Remember, Your Highness, this is how the Northern Revolt began, with taxes, not heresy." But Isabel's reply was ice. "Rebellion grows from weakness. We will show strength." In June 1606, she issued the decree that would define her reign. Water is the property of the state. Its use, distribution, and trade belongs solely to the sovereigns. The Edict of Brussels, soon called the Water Ban, declared absolute royal control over every well, river, and canal. Across the land, fountains were sealed, wells locked. Farmers begged for permission to irrigate. Merchants bribed officials for passage along canals now guarded by armed men. Bruges, Antwerp, Mechelen, all erupted in riots. Spanish troops crushed them with brutal efficiency. Isabel stood unyielding. Authority must be preserved at any cost. Her husband's voice, softer, tried to reach her. At the cost of their trust? At the cost of chaos, she answered. "My father taught me, it is better to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both." Albert said nothing more. The power between them had shifted. In public, she remained regal, a model of composure. Her court admired her discipline. Ambassadors praised her intellect. But behind closed doors, she was restless. Sleep fled. Letters from Madrid criticized the expense of her wars. The Vatican sent veiled reproaches about her severity. Only her confessor knew how deeply her faith and pride intertwined, how she saw her struggle as divine duty, a fight to preserve order against rebellion and sin. When she rode through the countryside, peasants bowed in silence. None dared meet her gaze. To them she was not a queen but a force, cold, remote, as inexorable as winter. By the end of 1606, the first whisper of illness appeared. A small rash on her arm. Nothing alarming. The royal physicians prescribed the usual ointment, a thick paste of mercury and fat, believed to purge impurities. She obeyed. Within weeks, the rash spread. Little pustules appeared on her neck and arms. She complained of itching that kept her awake through the night. The doctors assured her it was nothing serious. But her attendants began to notice the smell, a faint metallic sweetness that clung to her skin, to her sheets, to the air itself. Mercury. And the more she used it, the worse she became. Yet even as her body began to betray her, her resolve hardened. She could not appear weak, not before her husband, not before her court, not before the land that already tested her rule. She covered the sores with silk gloves and pearls, claiming the damp climate of Brussels was to blame. But behind the veils, the infection grew. Outside the palace walls, famine and disease returned. The restrictions on water had crippled sanitation. In the crowded quarters of the cities, sickness spread fast. Merchants wrote letters begging for relief. Priests warned that God was punishing the land. Albert pleaded for reform. Lift the harshest edicts. Let the rivers flow freely again. Isabel refused. If we bend now, they will never obey again. The once admiring court now whispered behind her back. Her brilliance had curdled into obsession. Still, she held her ground. The daughter of Philip II, the last true guardian of Spain's authority in the north. On a gray November morning, Isabel sat before a mirror draped in black cloth. She could barely stand. Her reflection, swollen, pale, marked by angry red lesions, stared back like that of a stranger. She touched her cheek and winced. Beneath the skin, something seemed to move. She dismissed the thought. It must be her imagination or the trembling of the candlelight. Outside, rain finally fell, the first in months. It drummed on the roof of Coudenberg Palace, trickling down the gutters. Servants whispered that it was an omen, but Isabel never looked up from the mirror. And so began her descent, a woman who sought to master the element that sustains life, and instead awakened the slow, creeping vengeance of nature itself. Her sickness would soon become a symbol, her own body turning into the battlefield she once ruled. The empress who banned water was about to learn that nothing in creation can ever truly be forbidden. Winter came early to Brussels in 1607, and with it came silence in the palace halls. The great fires that once roared in the Coudenberg hearths now seemed to do little against the cold damp that crept through stone and bone alike. The court had learned to move quietly. Behind the curtains, whispers traveled faster than any messenger. The Archduchess was ill, gravely so. It had started with that rash on her arm months before, a trifling irritation. The mercury ointments, soothing at first, had turned corrosive, and the skin beneath her sleeves had become a landscape of sores. The royal physicians murmured words like humors, toxins, and divine punishment, but none dared speak the truth. They had no idea what was consuming her. Isabel refused to be seen. She kept her chambers sealed and her attendants few. Only her most loyal Spanish ladies remained at her side. When Albert came to visit, she would cover her arms with long gloves and lace, insisting that her affliction was nothing more than fatigue. But each week her strength diminished, and the scent that hung in her rooms grew unbearable, a sweet, metallic odor that clung to everything she touched. Outside, the world reflected her decay. The water ban had turned from law to curse. With every canal sealed, with every well padlocked by royal decree, the cities were drowning in their own filth. In Ghent and Bruges, the stench of rot filled the air. Disease followed in the wake of the soldiers who enforced her edicts. Where water once flowed, pestilence now reigned. Albert pleaded again and again for reason. Let the people drink, Isabel. Let them bathe. You rule no kingdom if it dies of thirst. But she, pale and feverish, would only shake her head. Weakness is what killed my father's peace. Authority must hold, even when it hurts. Her attendants said she began to dream aloud at night, speaking to her father's ghost. They would hear her murmur through the fever. You were right, father. Fear binds stronger than love. When dawn came, she would wake and order new inspections of the canals, new taxes on the ferries. In 1608, as spring returned, her illness entered its next phase. The sores grew deeper, the skin around them blackened. She complained of movement under the flesh, a crawling sensation. Her Spanish doctors dismissed it as delusion. Then one morning, her lady-in-waiting screamed. A small white larva had slipped from a wound on the Empress's arm. The news spread like wildfire through the palace. Servants crossed themselves in terror. Some whispered that the worms were God's judgment, punishment for trying to control what he had created. Others, more cruelly, called her the wormed queen. Albert summoned Flemish physicians, among them a man named Jan Baptist van Helmont, an innovator in natural medicine. Isabel refused to see them. No Flemish hand will touch me, she said. They hate me. They will poison me in my sleep. But Albert persisted, and at last she allowed van Helmont to examine her under strict conditions. He would enter her chambers only in the presence of her Spanish ladies. When he lifted the bandages, the truth silenced the room. Her arms, neck, and chest were riddled with small openings where maggots writhed, feeding on her living flesh. The smell was overwhelming. Van Helmont, struggling to keep his composure, said softly, Your Highness suffers from a parasitic infestation. It can be treated, but the wounds must be cleansed, washed, with water. At that word, Isabel's eyes widened with fury. Water, she hissed. You would drown me like a common peasant? Do you mock me? Albert stepped forward, voice trembling between command and despair. This is no jest. It is life or death. You will do as the doctor says. The treatment began at once. Van Helmont and his assistants worked for days, carefully removing the larvae, cleaning the sores with boiling water mixed with vinegar and herbs. Isabel endured it in silence at first, teeth clenched, eyes hollow. But her body was too weak. Years of mercury had poisoned her blood. Each bath left her trembling, her skin raw and bleeding. Still, she endured, whispering prayers between sobs. Outside her chambers, change was underway. Albert, acting in her stead, reopened the canals and signed the 12 years truce with the Dutch. The long war that had drained Spain for half a century was over. When the news reached her bedside, Isabel did not rage as expected. She only whispered, "Perhaps it is for the best. Water flows, as you said. It cannot be held forever." Her recovery never came. By the summer of 1609, the maggots had burrowed too deep. They emerged daily now, falling onto the sheets. Servants lit incense to mask the odor, but it was no use. The palace had become a tomb. In desperation, Van Helmont proposed one final treatment, a full bath of warm water infused with lavender, rosemary, and thyme. "If nothing else," he said gently, "let her die clean." Albert wept when she agreed. The bath was prepared in a marble basin lined with linen. When she was lowered into the water, she gasped, not in pain, but in release. The worms floated to the surface, hundreds of them, turning the clear water crimson. Her attendants cried out. Isabel closed her eyes and whispered, "If I must die, let it be clean." That night, she passed away quietly, her hand in Albert's. For the first time in years, her face looked peaceful. Outside, as the bells of Brussels tolled for her soul, rain began to fall, soft and steady, washing the city streets that had long been dry. Albert ordered her body to be washed, perfumed, and wrapped in Spanish linen before burial. The people, who had cursed her in life, lined the streets for her funeral. Some threw flowers, others whispered prayers of forgiveness. To them, she was still the Empress, stern, tragic, and unbreakable. In the cathedral, the Archbishop's eulogy echoed under the vaulted ceiling. Power, like water, must flow to give life. When it is hoarded, it corrupts and destroys its keeper. As her coffin descended into the crypt, thunder rumbled across the city. To many, the rain was a sign that the Empress who banned water had finally made peace with it. Brussels, 12 years after her death, looked like a city reborn. The canals, once chained by law and fear, ran open again, silver under the morning light. The fountains that had stood dry during Isabel's rule now sang with clear water, drawing laughter from children and chatter from market women. The air smelled cleaner. The city itself seemed to breathe again. High above, in the same palace that had once held her ghostly silence, Archduke Albert stood by a window. He was older now, his hair the color of frost, his steps measured and careful. Yet every morning, when the sun touched the roofs of Brussels, he still thought of her. The woman who had ruled beside him. The woman who had fought the tide and lost. Each year, on the day she died, Albert held a quiet mass. The candles burned low, the air heavy with incense, and when the last prayer was spoken, he would walk alone to her tomb in the Cathedral of St. Gudula. The marble was smooth beneath his hand. Her name, Isabel Clara Eugenia, Archduchess of Austria, Sovereign of the Netherlands, was carved beneath a single Latin phrase, Aqua vita, aqua sapientia, water is life, water is wisdom. He had chosen those words himself. Now, in the year 1621, visitors had come from Madrid, among them a young cleric named Baltasar de Zuniga, nephew to the powerful Count Duke of Olivares. He had come to negotiate matters of state, but there was another reason he sought an audience. He was writing a history of the Spanish Netherlands, and the legend of the Empress who banned water had captured his imagination. That evening, after formal business was done, Albert invited him to the palace library. The firelight flickered across old maps and worn books, the ghosts of empires past. "You wish to know about Isabel," Albert said, pouring wine into 2 crystal cups. "But I warn you, the truth will not satisfy those who love legends." Zuniga smiled politely. "Your Highness, history is never satisfied. It only asks to understand." Albert studied the flames. "Then understand this. She was not a monster, nor a saint. She was born into a world built on fear. Her father, Philip II, believed that control was holiness, that the world must be contained, purified, ruled by divine order. Isabel inherited that belief, but she was sent to govern a land that lived by opposite laws, a land of rivers, canals, rain, and rebellion. He paused, the wine trembling slightly in his hand. To her, water represented everything she could not command. It was free, untamed, dangerous, and because she feared it, she tried to conquer it. That was her sin and her tragedy. Zuniga leaned forward, fascinated. And her illness? The stories. Albert nodded slowly. True enough, though twisted by rumor. The doctors said it came from mercury poisoning, worsened by her refusal to bathe. The worms were real, a cruel irony. The very thing she forbade became the thing that might have saved her. When the Flemish physician Van Helmont told her that water could cleanse her wounds, she nearly struck him. But in the end, when she finally accepted it, she found peace. I was there. I saw her die with serenity I had never known in her life. For a while they said nothing. Only the crackle of the fire filled the silence. Then Albert added softly, "You see, Father Zuniga, Isabel never understood that power, like water, cannot be held forever. Try to dam it, and it will find another way." She learned that too late, but she learned it all the same. The next morning, Zuniga visited the cathedral. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass, painting the marble tombs in blue and gold. Isabel's fountain still trickled faintly, a drop at a time. It seemed alive, as though the Empress had at last made peace with the element she feared. He wrote down what Albert had told him, but when he returned to Spain, the story grew beyond history. In the decades and centuries that followed, her tale became a parable told in countless forms. In the taverns of Flanders, she was the Empress of Worms, punished by heaven for her arrogance. Mothers told their children, "Never deny the river its flow, or the Empress will come for you in the night." In Spain, she was remembered differently, as a pious infanta, a woman of faith who carried her father's legacy to a foreign land and died defending it. Painters depicted her as serene and radiant, holding a rosary and a lily, symbols of devotion rather than tyranny. In the Age of Enlightenment, philosophers rediscovered her story as an allegory of absolutism. They said her death was proof that no human law can override the natural order. To forbid water, one French writer remarked, is to forbid life. During the Romantic era, her legend took on darker hues. Poets described her final bath as a scene of Gothic beauty, a queen submerged in crimson water, the worms floating away like sins forgiven. In the 19th century, Belgian nationalists reinterpreted her as a symbol of foreign oppression, the Spanish empress who tried to strangle their land, and in doing so, was devoured by it. By the 20th century, scholars were still debating her. Was she a tyrant or a victim of her own faith? Was the story exaggerated by misogyny? A powerful woman turned into a monster to warn others against ambition? Historians uncovered Van Helmont's original medical report: dermatitis, mercury poisoning, infection, science replacing myth. Yet the moral, they admitted, remained as powerful as ever. In 2009, for centuries after her death, an international symposium in Brussels examined her legacy. The historians concluded that her tale had transcended fact. It had become a cultural myth, not about an empress, but about humanity itself, about the eternal tension between control and freedom, reason and nature. Today, few in Brussels know her full story, but her name lingers in language and ritual. To say someone forbids water means to attempt the impossible, to resist change. And to suffer the Empress's worms means to be destroyed by one's own stubbornness. Every June, the city holds the Festival of Water, a week of music and light to mark her passing. At the end of the celebration, the fountains are turned off for 1 minute, total silence, before they burst again into flow. It is called the Empress's Reconciliation. Crowds gather in the grand place. Children toss coins into the main fountain, where a plaque reads, "Water, like life, cannot be contained, only guided." The coins glitter as they sink, the water carrying them away. The story of Isabel Clara Eugenia, once a tale of tyranny and death, has become a reminder, whispered through centuries. That power, like water, must flow. That control without compassion becomes decay. And that even the mightiest of rulers, in the end, must bow to the quiet wisdom of the river. The morning mist hung low over Brussels, soft and silver, curling through the narrow alleys that once smelled of smoke and blood. Centuries had passed, yet the city seemed to remember. The canal waters rippled against their stone banks, whispering stories that time itself refused to bury. Somewhere near the Grand Place, a street vendor poured water from a brass jug into a basin, and for a fleeting moment, the reflection on the surface showed the faint outline of a woman's face, calm, pale, crowned, before the image dissolved into ripples. It was June again, the season of the Festival of Water. Lanterns floated on the canals, their reflections like scattered stars on a liquid sky. Every year, this celebration drew thousands, locals and travelers alike, all to honor the same paradoxical figure, the empress who had once forbidden water, and in doing so, had immortalized it. From balconies and bridges, the people watched as actors in velvet gowns reenacted her final hours. A woman dressed as Isabel stood in a marble tub, surrounded by dancers symbolizing water. The music swelled, a blend of church organ and distant drums, as the worms of her legend became ribbons of red silk, carried away by a sudden wave of light projected across the square. The audience gasped, not in horror, but in awe. It was no longer a story of punishment. It had become one of transformation. An old historian, standing among the crowd, turned to his students and said quietly, "It took her death to teach us life. Her curse became our lesson." The students nodded, recording the moment on their phones, not knowing that 400 years earlier, those same stones had echoed with soldiers' boots and people's cries. When the final scene ended, the actress playing Isabel stepped forward and spoke words from the Empress's real letters. Those trembling sentences written in her last days, preserved in the archives of Madrid. "I have fought against the current all my life. I believed strength was resistance. Now I see that wisdom lies in flowing. For water, though soft, shapes the hardest stone." The square fell silent. Only the fountain spoke, rising in perfect arcs of silver under the lights. Then, as if by ancient signal, the music stopped. The water ceased. Every drop froze midair in the glow of the lamps. For one breathless minute, Brussels stood still. Then, the release. Water erupted from every fountain, crashing and roaring like applause. Children screamed with laughter, lovers kissed under the spray, and old men lifted their hands as though feeling a blessing. The festival had ended and begun again, all at once. Up on the hill, the cathedral bells tolled midnight. Inside, beneath marble and candlelight, the tomb of Isabel Clara Eugenia gleamed faintly. The small fountain above it, the one Archduke Albert had ordered carved 4 centuries ago, still flowed, drop by drop. A steady rhythm, eternal. And in that rhythm, the city found meaning. Every historian, every poet, every visitor who stood before her resting place saw something different. Some saw tragedy, a woman undone by pride. Others saw a martyr of her own faith, crushed beneath the weight of a dying empire. But most saw what she had finally become, a symbol of acceptance. In time, artists across Europe reimagined her story. In Paris, a romantic painter depicted her bath as a baptism, the empress rising from red waters into light. In Venice, a sculptor carved her likeness holding a shell overflowing with water, eyes closed in peace. In Madrid, a play was written where her ghost walked through the Escorial, whispering to her father's tomb, "Father, I have learned, control is not order. Order lives in the flow." Even in modern classrooms, her name remained a metaphor. Political scientists cited her when speaking of leaders who feared reform. Environmentalists called her the first ruler to wage war on nature and lose. Psychologists analyzed her obsession with purity as the reflection of a soul trapped by doctrine. Yet through all interpretations, her final moment, that act of surrender to water, was what endured. It became a mirror for the human condition, our endless struggle to control what cannot be controlled, to possess what must be shared. In Brussels today, the locals still say that if you walk by the old Koutenberg Palace at dawn, when the mist is thick and the city sleeps, you might hear a faint sound, the rustle of silk, the whisper of a woman's voice carried by the river wind. It is said she walks along the canal, her reflection rippling in the water she once feared, her steps light, her face serene. Not as a ghost seeking forgiveness, but as a memory finally at peace. The water flows on, carrying her story from century to century, reshaping it like the stones of the city walls. Because water remembers, and so does time. And as long as rivers run through Brussels, the empress who banned water will never truly be gone. Morning light spilled across Brussels like liquid gold. The festival was over, but the streets still glistened with moisture, the cobblestones shining, the canals running full and bright. Vendors opened their stalls again, sweeping away the petals that floated on the water. The air smelled of rain, of stone, and faintly, of incense drifting from the cathedral. The city had awoken renewed, as if baptized by its own history. At the Grand Place, tourists gathered by the main fountain where a bronze plaque bore the famous words, "Water, like life, cannot be contained, only guided." Few of them knew who had first said it. Fewer still understood that the fountain marked the heart of an empire's greatest paradox. But every time someone tossed a coin and made a wish, a small part of Isabel Clara Eugenia's story lived again. That morning, in the city archives, a curator named Elise Van Rompuy unlocked a box sealed for centuries. Inside lay Isabel's final letters, yellowed, fragile, and tied with faded blue silk. She had read them before, but today, after the night's celebration, they felt different. She touched the paper carefully, tracing the trembling ink. May 20th, 1609. Today, as they washed my wounds, I saw the worms fall away in the water. Is it not the perfect justice? The element I forbade is now my only relief. Perhaps I have been at war with the one force that could have saved me. Elise paused, eyes stinging. These words were not the confessions of a tyrant, but of a human being, a woman raised to believe that control was salvation, only to discover that surrender was grace. She turned to the next page. June 1st, 1609. I dream of clear water. I do not fear it. It carries away the pain, not my soul. I understand now. Power should flow, not freeze. If I could begin again, I would rule as rivers do, guiding, never grasping. Those were the last words the Empress ever wrote. Elise closed the box, the silence of the archive thick around her. Outside, the faint sound of water echoed through the marble corridors. It wasn't hard to imagine that it came from the old Coudenberg cisterns, the same ones that had once been sealed under Isabel's edict. Now they were open to the public, a symbol of renewal. Later that afternoon, Elise walked to the ruins of the palace itself. What remained were stones, worn smooth by centuries, resting quietly beneath the modern city. She descended into the cool air of the excavated vaults where guided tours whispered through the past. There, among the old wells and broken tiles, she stood beside the trickle of an underground spring. The water shimmered under the dim light. For a long while, she said nothing. Then she whispered to no one in particular, "She's still here." At that moment, a child nearby dropped a coin into the spring, and the sound of it echoed like a heartbeat. The ripples spread outward, gentle, endless. That evening, as the sun sank beyond the spires, the bells of St. Gudula rang again. The people of Brussels moved through their ordinary routines, commuters on bicycles, shopkeepers closing shutters, lovers walking along the canal. None of them noticed the way the sky turned the color of pewter or how the first drops of rain began to fall. It wasn't a storm, just a soft, persistent drizzle, the kind that seems to belong to the city, that slips into its rhythm and refuses to leave. The drops tapped against the old palace stones, slid down the bronze face of the Empress's statue, and fell quietly into the water below. In that quiet, the city remembered. For 4 centuries, her name had been twisted, judged, reimagined. But beneath the myth, one truth endured. Isabel Clara Eugenia had been a woman born into the age of iron and faith, who learned too late that even iron rusts, and faith must bend. Her life had been a dam, her death a flood. And so, the water kept flowing, through time, through stories, through the hearts of those who still listened. Every generation added a drop. The historians who studied her, the artists who painted her, the children who laughed under the fountains that bore her curse. Every drop carried the same message, whispered through centuries of change, that power without mercy dries to dust, but forgiveness, like water, endures forever. As night fell, the rain turned heavier, washing the city clean. From the cathedral roof, water poured through gargoyle mouths like laughter. Down below, at the river's edge, the reflection of the city danced, towers, bridges, lamps, all trembling upon the surface. If anyone had stood long enough to listen, they might have heard it, a voice beneath the rain, soft and almost kind. Let it flow. The words melted into the sound of the river, carried away into the dark, toward the same sea that had carried her ships, her empire, her pride. And long after the last drop of rain disappeared into the cobblestones, the story of Isabel Clara Eugenia, the empress who banned water, continued to live, not as warning or curse, but as truth. Because water remembers, because history flows, and because no matter how many centuries pass, the river never ends.